The evolution of the English language, the morphology of inflections. What may have caused inflections in the English language to disappear? There are a couple logical reasons for this, neither being the exact cause, but with things evolving, there is normally more than one cause that results in the effect. The effect would be the loss of inflections. We have the Norman Conquest of 1066. With the Norman Conquest, we have William the Conqueror, who was the first conqueror of England, who reigned from 1066 to his death in 1087. With the Norman Conquest came the French-speaking people. The Normans spoke a language called Anglo-Norman or Norman French. They were very isolated, however, but even with this isolation, Anglo-Norman or French was the verbal language of the court and their administration, and was used in all governmental proceedings. Latin, on the other hand, was used for the written language by the church and for official records. The Domesday Book was written in Latin to emphasize the Norman legal authority. This brings us to the beginning of Middle English. What exactly is Anglo-Norman French? It's a variety of Norman French used in England after the Norman Conquest. It remained the language of English nobility for several centuries and has had a strong influence on legal phraseology in English, even to this day. The peasants and lower class were the English speakers, and they were 95% of the population. The other 5%, however, considered them to be low class and vulgar. All the languages, however, had to develop, coexist, and merge, and intermingle, and be married. It is at this point when Old English begins to evolve into Middle English. Anglo-Norman remained the language of the kings and nobility of England for more than 300 years. It wasn't until King Henry gained the English throne in 1399 that England would have a monarch with an English tongue, and for the first time since the Norman Conquest, the king addresses the people in English. We're moving from synthetic to analytic. What is a synthetic language? Well, it's a language which has many different endings on nouns and verbs, which indicate the grammatical function of the subject and the object. An example of a synthetic word would be the dog's leg. The S on the dog makes it synthetical because the S is an inflectional marking. An analytical use of this word is the leg of the dog. Those S's are called inflections. And today, most of our Old English inflections have been replaced by prepositions. Prepositions precede nouns or pronouns and express a relation to another word or element in the clause. I am inside my house. Inside would be the preposition. These common prepositions used when transitioning from Old English to Middle English are to, for, and of, but there are many, many others as well. And how did we lose inflections? Well, basically, the creolization of the British survivors of the conquest, and everybody needed to communicate with their new rulers. The languages collectively had many incompatibilities. Therefore, endings were dropped, words were borrowed, some words were dropped completely, some words remained, and other words had completely different meanings. They had meaning shifts, so the same word became something other than what it was 100 years ago. So these are external changes. And what exactly are external changes? Well, they're changes that evolve with contact between people of different languages. With the Norman Conquest, it's impossible to not have many of these external changes. Morphology of the Middle English happened in 5 major changes that occurred, which resulted in the loss of inflections. The first being the introduction of the feminine she. Ha or hyo was used before she. 2, the introduction of the plural they. Third person pronouns with an H are gradually replaced with the th. Changes in the use of second persons would be the third. Old English, thou and thee are singular and ye and you are plural. In Middle English, the singular becomes the familiar form and the plural becomes the polite formal form. The fourth, the loss of dative accusative distinction. Only Hein survives into early Middle English. Fifth, the loss of the dual word unc, which is the equivalent to the singular me and the plural us. Over several hundred years, these changes continue to evolve the English language. Case endings on nouns and adjectives slowly disappear, resulting in the loss of inflections. Don't be sad. The marvelous inflections eventually do make a comeback. We have alterations in inflectional morphology. What are alterations? They're a variation in the form and or sound of a word or word part. It's also known as alternates. Examples of an alteration would be the word knife. To pluralize knife, you would take the F and change it to a V, and it now becomes knives. This is an F to V alternation. Another example would be a word like electric and electricity. Electric ends in a K sound, electricity ends in a an S sound. And these are simply related words which don't necessarily reflect pluralization. Lastly, and more subtle, we have the three-way alteration. This is an English plural marker, or it's an inflection. Yes, a real inflection. Examples are, to pluralize cat, we would add an S for cats. To pluralize dog, we would add an S for dogs, but that would have a Z sound. To pluralize fox, we would add an ES for a Z sound, and then we also add an extra vowel. The deciding factor among the three alternates is determined by the nature of the preceding sound. We also have morphological inflections. Morphological inflections are when you add a suffix to a word to assign its grammatical meaning. They add tense, number, possession, or comparison to existing words, just as the inflections did in Old English. It is important to note when a suffix is added to the base meaning of a word, it does not change. There are 8 of these. First being the plural, second, the possessive, third, there's actually 3. We have the third person, singular, and present tense. Fourth is the past tense. Fifth is the present participle. Sixth is the past participle. Seventh is the comparative degree. And eighth, we have the superlative degree. We also, since it is the English language, have irregular inflectual morphology. This morphological process has internal vowel change, such as sing, sang, sung, and even song. These irregular internal vowel changes represent historical remnants of former grammatical inflectional systems. So, having said all of that, inflections never really left us at all. They've been here the whole time.